For the last 30 years, there's been an elephant in the room that no one has talked about. And the elephant has been that there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that user-centered design has ever worked. We have great designs. That has happened. But how did we get them if we didn't get them through this user-centered design thing? We went off and we found a whole bunch of teams that are really good at putting out great designs. Then we went out and found a whole bunch of teams that have really smart, clever people, but constantly struggle to get a good design out. They don't succeed. And we started to compare the two of these groups. Patterns began to emerge in our research. And one of the patterns that emerged had to do with how work gets done. Now you can think about the way work gets done on a spectrum. And in the middle of that spectrum is this idea of process. Process doesn't have to be a repeated thing. Process is just the steps you use to get something done. And if you got something done, you had a process. Methodologies are this, the formalization of process to get some sort of repeatability out of it, right? We formalize our process to make them repeatable. And what we learned when we started to put these things on the graph was that there was something even beyond methodology. Methodology, what's beyond it is dogma. Dogma is when you have this unquestioned faith in something, right? It's against the rules to even question that this is okay or not okay, to even test the logic behind it. So we have this process, methodology, dogma. That's the sort of layout that we have on this side of the spectrum. But there's stuff on the other side of the spectrum that turn out to be just as important. In fact, more important. Techniques are the building blocks of the process. Remember I said process is how you get something done? Techniques are basically the building blocks of that, the little individual things. There's something else on the far end of the spectrum too. We call that tricks. We don't have a good name for it, so tricks is what came out of it. It's just sort of what stuck. Tricks are sort of improperly used techniques that get the job done anyways. Now here's what we expected to find in our data. When we went out and compared the successful organizations with the struggling organizations, we expected to find that the successful organizations would have some sort of magic methodology or dogma that drives them, that the struggling organizations didn't have. But that's not what we found at all. What we found was that there was no successful methodology or dogma. In fact, most of the successful organizations didn't use any methodology or dogma. The struggling companies, on the other hand, were all about methodology. And every time they failed to get something out, they made their methodology more rigorous, more dogmatic. It was all about increasing methodology. And of course, every time they increased it, it got worse. The successful companies focused on tricks and techniques, making sure everybody on the team had a full toolkit of tricks and techniques. They knew how to do stuff both right and wrong. And that was what they were all about. The struggling companies, they focused on methodology. As long as the trick or technique was in the methodology and it was described in the manual, they could do it, but at any other time, they couldn't figure out how it worked. They were lost. And there were no dogmas. Which brings me back to what I was talking about before. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it's about time that we replace the user-centered dogma. That we just ditch it. It has outlived its usefulness. There's an old European folktale known as the stone soup. Stone soup has to do with this. There's a traveler who, in these days is traveling on foot. And he comes into a village. And it's tradition that when a traveler comes in the village will offer him a place to stay, usually barn, and whatever leftover scraps they have for food. But this particular village doesn't have any scraps because they've been suffering a drought. Every house he knocks on, they don't have any food. They themselves don't have enough food to feed themselves. And he's walking through this village, and he's seeing the farms, and he's seeing that they have this drought, but he's seeing that there's something to it. So he goes into the center of town, and he builds a little fire. And he asks to borrow a kettle. And people start to gather around and ask him what he's doing, because maybe he has food. He says, well, I do have something that will make us some food. I have a magic stone. So he then takes the stone, and he puts it in the pot with the water. Someone has offered a little bit of water from their well, the little bit they have, to this experiment. And he takes a stick and he starts to stir the pot with the stone and the water. And somebody says, what's this going to taste like? He says, well, it would taste better if we had some carrots. Somebody says, well, I got a couple carrots in my pantry. Okay. Somebody gets some carrots. Put that in. If we had a little meat, that might work too. Well, I got a little bit of lamb stored away. Okay, we'll take some lamb. Somebody else says, I got some beets. Okay, we'll put some beets in. All of a sudden, the community, everybody starts emptying out their cupboards, putting a little bit of everything into this pot in the center. And within, minutes, they have stew. And everybody enjoys the stew. They serve it. It's delicious. Everybody loves it. They're having a great time. And as his parting gift to the village for feeding him this wonderful stew, he leaves them the stone. He says, now you can make all the stew you want. And he walks away. And a lot of what we do when we go into teams is we are that traveler. We go in and we bring our stone. And maybe it's something we call user-centered design. And we put the stone into the pot and we make the soup. And out comes a great design when we've done it well, when the team has done it well. And then, if we're good, we can leave them the gift and say, hey, here's the stone. You can keep doing this. You will continue to do well. That's what I think is happening. And so it's not about the particular methodology or dogma. It's about what we do when we work as teams. It's about good teamwork. It's about figuring out what we're trying to build and how we try and build it. That's what this is about. And sure, you can make a recipe, right? And the recipe will have the important steps in it. But there's two lessons to learn from this story. First, that if you get everybody working towards the same end, everybody working towards the same goal together, you will succeed much better than if everybody keeps themselves and just bitches and moans. Right? That's a good lesson. Okay, great. But there's another lesson that nobody ever talks about. And that's this. At no point in the story does the traveler ever believe that the stone makes soup. Right? Nowhere do we actually say that the traveler believes that that's what's happening. The traveler knows the stone is a placebo. And here's the beauty of placebos. They work 60% of the time, no matter what the disease is.